The obsidian chamber of the federated sentience was a testament to geological time, carved not by tools, but by immense gravitational forces harnessed and slowed to an agonizing crawl, its surfaces refracting the faint, cold light of distant regulatory stars into shifting mosaics of deep purple and unforgiving gray. Within this massive void, the air itself seemed compressed by the weight of galactic policy, thick with the pheromones of anxiety and the low-frequency hum of automated data processing units. Units that currently projected the disturbing, statistically anomalous signature of an unknown vessel onto the central plenum. Elevated on a dais of magnetized ferrosilicate sat the primary speaker, Thuron, a kriller of impeccable lineage and cold, calculating efficiency, his compound eyes narrowing infinitesimally as the debate stretched into its third cycle, eroding the brittle patience of the unified council. Flanking him were the delegates of the Cygnus Collective, their forms shimmering masses of controlled light and hyperfocused thought, and across the vast expanse, the heavy, earthbound representatives of the Vorlag hegemony, their scaled hides shifting nervously, betraying a fear that transcended mere political concern and reached into the realm of ancestral dread. "The readings are consistent, Speaker," intoned Krell, the designated analyst from the Cygnus Collective, his voice a dispassionate, synthesized chord that cut through the chamber's oppressive silence. "The propulsion signature violates the established third and fourth laws of thermodynamics as ratified by the stellar concordance. It is statistically impossible, yet demonstrably present. The vessel, designated Terran Intruder P1, is maintaining a stable, low-energy velocity within the restricted buffer zone, displaying no hostile maneuvers, yet adhering to no recognized diplomatic or navigational protocols. Furthermore, the vessel's construction materials register high concentrations of elemental carbon and oxygen structures, implying a biology reliant on water and atmospheric pressure, a remarkably fragile architecture for interstellar transit." Thuron allowed a calculated pause, letting the implications of Krell's analysis settle like toxic dust upon the council. "Fragile analyst is the operative term. We have reviewed the initial cultural and historical data intercepts compiled from their home system, designated Sol III. A species barely unified on its own world, riddled with internal conflicts, driven by short-sighted emotional responses, and possessing a technological timeline measured in mere centuries, not millennia. We observe self-destructive tendencies, philosophical inconsistency, and an alarming disregard for long-term ecological stability. Why, then, are we permitting this statistical anomaly, this technological phantom, to consume the time of the Fedorate?" Thuron's voice carried the ingrained arrogance of a civilization that had mastered stability by weeding out the unpredictable. A slow, deliberate rustling sound emanated from the Vorlag section. Sesk, the ancient Vorlag emissary, whose tenure spanned the rise and fall of 5 minor stellar empires, shifted his massive bulk, his 4 eyes, usually dull and patient, now reflecting an alarming inner turmoil. Speaker Thuron disregards the gravity of the phenomenon, equating the technological signature with the cultural background, a mistake we have made only once before, millennia past, resulting in the Great Dislocation, Sesk rumbled, his voice a deep, resonant tremor that seemed to shake the very ferrosilicate floor. "I urge the Kriller to heed the warnings contained within the forgotten codices. The speed and efficiency of this vessel, the way it bends the known laws not by brute force but by elegant omission asterisk, this is precisely what our ancestors cautioned against. We dismissed the myths as pre-technological paranoia, stories of the silent crucible, and the engineers of constraint. This vessel, the pinnacle as they designate it in their own language, the name itself holds meaning the Kriller cannot comprehend." Thuron sighed internally, a complex respiratory function that served as a gesture of profound irritation. "Emissary Sesk, your reverence for myth is noted, but the Fedorate operates on demonstrable fact and predictive modeling. The Terrans are a Type 1.8 civilization on the Kardashev scale, barely reaching planetary mastery. Their history is noise, their biology is weak, their political structure is chaotic. Their vessel, while intriguing, is likely a fluke, a localized discovery they do not fully understand themselves. We send an exploratory probe, establish firm quarantine parameters, and offer limited technological uplift under strict Fedorate observation. They pose no threat, merely an administrative inconvenience." The Cygnus analyst, Krell, interjected, the synthesized chord taking on a sharper resonance. "The political instability, Speaker Thuron, is precisely the point of potential concern. A chaotic species with technology that breaches established physical laws is fundamentally unpredictable. Moreover, the vessel, the Pinnacle Asterisk, exhibits an internal field modulation that suggests a highly complex, multidimensional calibration previously theorized only in the most abstract physics. The very systems required to sustain life inside zones of absolute temporal decay. It is not just a faster ship. It is a ship designed for circumstances we have yet to confirm even exist. Exactly, Sesk's voice vibrated with ancient conviction. It is the realization of the Shatterstar prophecy. The myths speak not of a species seeking conquest, but one seeking asterisk truth in the deep void, ignoring the comfortable scaffolding of known physics. They ignore the warnings of stability because they perceive a greater, unseen instability lurking beyond. We must proceed with profound caution, or we risk attracting their full attention, which the myths assure us is a fate worse than any aggression. The debate spiraled into predictable cycles of Kriller pragmatism versus Vorlag apprehension, the Cygnus Collective providing the cold, undeniable data that fed both sides. The political tension was a tangible pressure, threatening to fracture the unity of the Fedorate. Decision, driven by Thuron's insistence on maintaining the established order, was eventually mandated. A single, heavily shielded diplomatic cruiser, the Asterisk Vigilance of Policy, would approach the Terran vessel. Its mission was surveillance, initial contact, and the stern transmission of Fedorate quarantine protocols. The Kriller would not be swayed by ancient superstition. They would treat the Terrans as a minor, disruptive variable, easily contained within the established equations of galactic power. 3 full rotational cycles later, far from the polished arrogance of the Obsidian Chamber, the Asterisk Vigilance of Policy breached the designated buffer zone, its massive shielding activated, energy dampeners humming at maximum capacity, ready to counter any aggressive energy spike. Captain Xylax, a seasoned Kriller officer accustomed to the predictable, aggressive posturing of rising powers, stared at the main observation screen. The Terran vessel, the Pinnacle Asterisk, was precisely where it had been detected. Motionless, silent, a sleek, utterly seamless construct of obsidian black that absorbed all ambient light and radiated only a low, cold gravity signature. It was visually disturbing in its simplicity, lacking the ornate sensor arrays, weapon emplacements, or visible engines that characterized every known vessel in the Fedorate. It simply was Asterisk. "Captain," reported the tactical officer, his voice tense, "sensor sweeps indicate no active external power usage. No weapon locks, no defensive field fluctuation. It is maintaining stasis using negligible energy. We cannot confirm life signs beyond the immediate internal hull signature, which is incredibly faint, almost masked." "They are taunting us with efficiency," Xylax muttered, rubbing his mandibles in frustration. "Initiate standard diplomatic hailing protocol, channel Beta 7. Translate the initial query into the 97 most probable universal languages. Cycle through them 3 times. Demand recognition of Fedorate sovereignty in this sector and request immediate identification and statement of intent." The Asterisk Vigilance of Policy pulsed with the massive energy of the communication beam, broadcasting the Fedorate's political and military weight across the small void separating the 2 ships. Silence reigned, stretching out the seconds into an eternity of uncertainty. Captain Xylax felt the familiar cold prickle of anticipation, waiting for the inevitable, slightly panicked, or overly aggressive response characteristic of newly emerged spacefaring species. They would likely attempt bluff, or perhaps offer subservient excuses. The response came not as a burst of energy, nor as a chaotic jumble of signals, but as a single, impossibly clear, highly focused transmission that sliced through the static and the cruiser's defensive shielding with surgical precision. It bypassed the translation matrix, directly interfacing with the deep linguistic processing centers of the Kriller crew, yet presented itself in perfect, formal Kriller dialect, a dialect reserved for high scholarship and ancient treaty negotiation, far too sophisticated for a species deemed primitive. The voice was human, male, utterly devoid of inflection or emotion, yet resonant with an inexplicable, weighty calm. "We hear the request of the federated sentience, conveyed through the vessel Vigilance of Policy. We acknowledge the designation of this sector as belonging to Fedorate observation. We are the unified Terran contingent, represented by the vessel Pinnacle. Our intent is precisely where we are. We are waiting. We recommend the Fedorate utilize its political resources to comprehend the implicatio." "Ns of waiting," rather than focusing upon the superficiality of movement or aggression. Xylax stared at the screen, momentarily paralyzed not by fear, but by the sheer intellectual audacity of the response. Waiting, the Fedorate's entire existence was predicated on decisive action, expansion, and the active management of resources. Waiting implied a certainty that bordered on omniscience, an absolute confidence in the inevitable outcome of their presence. Run a full analysis on the linguistic structure and tonal calibration of that response, Xylax commanded, his usual rigid composure beginning to fray. It bypassed our filters and utilized a dialect of Kriller that requires access to our restricted historical archives. How could they know that? The tactical analyst shook his head, his frustration mirrored in the erratic flicking of his antennae. Captain, the signature is clean. No detected intrusion, no data packet theft. It is as if they knew the required sophistication a priori. Furthermore, the energy required to focus the transmission across this distance with zero energy dissipation. It suggests their energy generation is far beyond even the established upper limits of our own stellar forge technology. Their power generation is essentially infinite, or negligible, which amounts to the same terrifying conclusion. Xylax relayed the findings back to the obsidian chamber, injecting his professional anxiety into the cold reporting metrics. The response from the pinnacle was not a threat, yet it held the implicit weight of a vast, unseen power. When the message was analyzed back at the Fedorate Central Data Cores, the Kriller faction was forced to temporarily set aside its dismissal. Thuron, visibly perturbed, convened an emergency session. Sesk, the Vorlag emissary, listened to the playback of the Terran message with a slow, frightening nod. "The implications of waiting," Sesk repeated, his voice now lower, imbued with a terrible confirmation. "The myths speak of their approach, the silence before the reckoning. They do not rush toward a perceived advantage because they understand that time and space are variables to be manipulated, not hurdles to be overcome. They waited for us to initiate contact, to show our hand, to reveal the rigidity of our thinking. This is diplomatic obfuscation, nothing more," Thuron argued, though his certainty was beginning to buckle. "They are attempting to destabilize us through psychological warfare, presenting an image of unattainable superiority." "Superiority?" Sesk challenged, fixing Thuron with a sorrowful gaze. "They are merely presenting logic asterisk. If their capacity is truly limitless, why expend energy fighting? If they arrived seeking conquest, they would have already breached the perimeter. Their patience suggests an objective far removed from territorial acquisition or resource control. It suggests a focus on the fundamental structure of reality itself." The Fedorate dispatched a specialized diplomatic corps, led by Ambassador Var, a Kriller renowned for his ability to navigate complex cultural minefields. The delegation utilized a smaller, highly advanced diplomatic shuttle, designed for observation and rapid withdrawal. This time, they prepared for the encounter not with military caution, but with intellectual dread. As the shuttle docked gently against the smooth, cold hull of the pinnacle, a surface Var noted felt strangely organic yet impossibly hard. The delegation prepared their protocols, standardized greetings, presentation of Fedorate governance documents, and carefully worded requests for technological disclosure. The airlock hissed open, revealing a short, brightly lit corridor that led into a chamber of breathtaking simplicity. The Terran chamber was not designed for intimidation or luxury, but for pure functionality. Its walls appeared to be single sheets of crystalline material that filtered light into precise, calming wavelengths. There were no visible interfaces, no wires, no redundant machinery. Standing at the center were two humans. They were physically unremarkable within the expected parameters of their species: 2 limbs, 2 eyes, terrestrial stature. They wore simple, functional uniforms of deep blue that seemed to absorb and diffuse the ambient light. What immediately seized Ambassador Var's attention was not their appearance, but their bearing. They exuded a stillness, a quiet, focused intensity that made the Kriller delegation feel profoundly clumsy and loud. The first human, who introduced herself simply as Envoy Lyra, offered a slow, deliberate movement of the head, a gesture Var's cultural data identified as an ancient, deep greeting. "Welcome, Ambassador Var of the Federated Sentience," Lyra stated, her voice as smooth and precise as the earlier transmission. "We trust your journey was efficient. We have calibrated the local atmospheric pressure and temperature to ensure your physical comfort, though we understand. Our gravity well is slightly less dense than that of Kriller Prime. We are prepared to commence dialogue immediately, without the customary ceremonial delays that often mask mutual uncertainty." Var, recovering quickly from the shock of the human's composure, initiated the formal greeting sequence. Envoy Lyra, we appreciate your consideration of our physiological needs. The Fedorate demands immediate clarification regarding your unauthorized entry into this regulated sector and the blatant violation of fundamental physical laws evident in your vessel's operation. Lyra listened patiently, her eyes maintaining an unnerving contact that seemed to penetrate Var's formal defenses. When he finished, she did not offer an immediate defense or counterargument. Instead, she asked a simple, unsettling question. Ambassador, the Fedorate has established the parameters of the universal laws. May I inquire as to the objective of establishing those laws? Var blinked, momentarily nonplussed. To maintain order, to provide predictability, to structure technological development and ensure stability against cosmological randomness. Stability, the second human, Envoy Kale, spoke for the first time, his voice a rich baritone that seemed to resonate with the very crystal walls. Stability is the most exquisite form of self-imposed constraint. The Fedorate defines the laws of the universe based on the observed limits of its own technological capacity, then enforces those limits as philosophical tenets. Do you not consider that the imposition of perceived law stifles the exploration of potential reality? Var felt a cold dread creeping into his reasoning. This was not the expected negotiation of territory or resources. This was a philosophical interrogation designed to expose the Fedorate's intellectual calcification. The laws are based on repeatable observation and empirical verification across countless civilizations, Var retorted, defending the bedrock of galactic society. Lyra leaned forward slightly, her posture remaining perfectly relaxed. Indeed, we do not deny the efficacy of those observations within the established framework. However, the pinnacle exists precisely to demonstrate that your framework is incomplete. Consider the energy crisis that plagues the outer rim of your territory. The Kriller solution involves the mining of vast energy-rich stellar bodies and the containment of fusion reactors of escalating complexity. We observed this data. The Fedorate expends immense resources fighting entropy with brute force. And what is your alternative? Var asked, his voice sharp with skepticism. Kale gestured subtly toward the pristine, seamless walls of the chamber. We do not fight entropy, we harmonize with it. The energy required to sustain this vessel to maintain its field to facilitate its transit is drawn not from physical resource conversion, but from the localized manipulation of the cosmological constant, the inherent energy of the void. We access the true quantum zero-point energy, not through explosive release, but through precise conceptual alignment. We do not violate your laws, Ambassador Var. We simply operate on a level of reality where your laws become statistically irrelevant approximations. The profound implication of this statement settled upon the Kriller delegation like a physical weight. The humans had achieved the theoretical holy grail of physics, free, absolute energy, and had done so with calm, restrained efficiency. Their power was not measured in fleet size or weapon potency, but in a quiet, complete mastery over the fundamental nature of existence. Var shifted the focus, desperate to find a relatable metric of power or weakness. If your civilization possesses such capability, why the documented history of internal conflict? Why the primitive social structure observed on your home world barely a century ago? Why the emotional volatility? Lyra offered the barest hint of what Var recognized as profound pity. Our history, Ambassador, is one of rapid, painful ascent. We were indeed primitive, driven by instinct and fear, constrained by perceived limitations. However, unlike the Fedorate, which enforces stability through homogenized governance, humanity utilized its internal conflicts as mechanisms of intense, accelerated pressure. Each ideological war, each existential threat, forced us to reevaluate fundamental principles not merely technologically, but ethically and philosophically. We were forced to evolve at an impossible rate. Our chaos, as you perceive it, was the crucible necessary to forge this capability. Kale elaborated, his voice grave. We realized that if we possess the power to shatter the laws of the universe, we must first possess the iron discipline not to shatter ourselves. Our ethical framework is not based on ancient decree, but on the painful, empirical lessons of self-destruction. We mastered our technology only after we had mastered our internal, most volatile nature. This is why we waited. We needed to confirm if the Fedorate, too, possessed the ethical maturity to handle the truths we carry. This revelation, that the human's terrifying technological capacity was intrinsically linked to a deeply, painfully earned ethical restraint, was the most profoundly destabilizing element of the encounter. The Kriller operated on a system where ethics were a regulatory framework enforced by dominance. The Terrans operated on a system where ethical restraint was the asterisk prerequisite for power. Var returned to the obsidian chamber carrying not merely data, but a palpable sense of existential vertigo. His report caused a silent, unprecedented shift in the council dynamic. Thuron was momentarily speechless, his structured world-view collapsing under the weight of human logic. Sesk, however, exhibited a strange, somber relief. "They proved the myths true," Sesk whispered, his massive body trembling. "The silent crucible. It was not a tale of a destructive weapon, but of a necessary, painful asterisk purification that grants access to reality's deeper mechanisms. The warnings were not about the humans' capacity to destroy us, but about our capacity to misunderstand them and invite our own demise through hubris." The Fedorate decided, with overwhelming consensus, to escalate diplomacy to the highest level, no longer treating the Terrans as a statistical threat, but as an existential enigma that required immediate, comprehensive understanding. Thuron, swallowing his pride, initiated direct communication with Envoy Lyra, utilizing the most formal and complex protocols available to the Kriller civilization. Unified Terran contingent, represented by the vessel Pinnacle. The Federated Sentience acknowledges the profundity of your technological advancement and the unexpected depth of your philosophical framework. We extend a formal invitation for full integration into the established diplomatic channels. We seek disclosure regarding the methodologies behind your propulsion and energy generation. Lyra's response was immediate, yet measured. The Terran contingent accepts the invitation for comprehensive dialogue. However, we must preface our disclosure with a cautionary framework. The technology employed by the Pinnacle requires not only deep scientific understanding, but a foundational shift in conceptual perception that the Fedorate currently rejects. You seek knowledge that fundamentally destabilizes your current political and technological infrastructure. Are you prepared to accept that the very laws you built your civilization upon are, in fact, merely localized constructs? Thuron, after a grueling internal struggle, responded, "We are prepared to accept verifiable truth, however disruptive." The next phase of contact was not a simple exchange of schematics, but an intensive, multi-species training and observational period aboard the Pinnacle Asterisk. Selected Kriller, Cygnus, and Vorlag scientists were permitted access, carefully guided by Lyra and Kale. The revelation of the Pinnacle S operation was a cascade of impossible truths. Its propulsion was not based on thrust or even warping space, but on achieving perfect inertial nullification by aligning the vessel with localized quantum fluctuations, a process Lyra called conceptual navigation. The ship wasn't moving asterisk through asterisk space. It was defining its location asterisk within asterisk space, utilizing the universe's inherent energy differential. Dr. Veth, a Cygnus physicist renowned for his cold detachment, spent weeks observing the power core. He emerged from the asterisk pinnacle deeply shaken, his light form flickering erratically. "They operate with absolute efficiency," he reported to the council in a strained, unnatural chord. "There is no waste heat, no radiation signature, no loss of mass. They are not merely utilizing zero-point energy, they are utilizing infinite energy with absolute moral restraint. They could power 1,000 systems simultaneously with less effort than we use to light a single urban center. Yet they choose only what is precisely necessary for their current function. Their power is not in their ability to acquire, but their disciplined, surgical refusal to overutilize. This is the definition of true, ethical power, a concept alien to the Fedorate. The political consequences were immense. The Kriller economic model, based entirely on the scarcity and controlled distribution of finite resources, was rendered instantly obsolete. If energy was limitless, what was the value of conquest? What was the purpose of vast administrative controls designed to ration power? Thuron, now visibly aged by the intellectual burden, found himself in a solitary meeting with Sesk. "Emissary, your prophecies were unnervingly accurate. The myth spoke of a disruption, but I perceived it as military. It is far worse. It is a conceptual dissolution." "It is neither worse nor better, speaker," Sesk corrected gently. "It is asterisk neck." "Emissary, the myths did not warn of the Terrans' arrival as an invasion, but as a necessary shift in perspective. You built your empire on the illusion of stability. They arrived to show you that stability, when based on false scarcity, is merely intellectual stagnation." During this period of intense diplomatic and scientific upheaval, Lyra and Kale maintained their quiet, purposeful presence. They offered the knowledge freely, without demanding concessions or allegiance, asking only for intellectual honesty in return. Their behavior was a constant, frustrating paradox, limitless power coupled with absolute humility. Why the extensive diplomatic engagement? Thuron finally asked Lyra during a private consultation. If your technology grants you such freedom, why waste time with the bureaucratic complexities of the Fedorate? Why not simply transcend our sphere of influence and continue your conceptual navigation unburdened by our limitations? Lyra met his gaze with an expression of profound, tired sincerity. Because, Speaker Thuron, we are not navigating for personal freedom or cultural expansion. We are navigating toward a consensus on reality. The reason we developed the Pinnacle and mastered these principles was not for a new form of travel, but for a new form of defense. This was the prelude to the grand, final reveal, the core truth that had driven humanity's painful evolution and propelled them across the void in the myth-proving vessel. Defense against what? Thuron pressed, the weight of a potential external threat momentarily eclipsing the internal political crisis. We have observed no significant power beyond the Fedorate borders, save for minor, disorganized systems. Kale stepped forward, producing a holographic projection that was unlike any visual data the Fedorate had ever cataloged. It was not a star chart, nor a galactic map, but a complex, multi-dimensional rendering of the very fabric of spacetime in the local cluster, a representation of the underlying constants and forces. The cosmos you perceive, Speaker, is not merely expanding. It is slowly, almost imperceptibly, decaying along certain fundamental axiomatic parameters, Kale explained, his voice low and urgent. We refer to this phenomenon as the silent tide. It is not an entity or a force that can be engaged militarily. It is a slow, structural collapse in the coherence of reality itself. Over epochs, the fundamental ratios that govern atomic stability, energy transfer, and even the speed of light are shifting ever so slightly but irrevocably. Thuron recoiled, his mind struggling to process the scale of the threat. Decay, that is the natural progression of the universe, millennia away from being relevant to our existence, Lyra countered gently. You operate under the assumption that the decay is uniform and linear. Our specialized sensors, developed alongside the Pinnacle *S technology, allow us to perceive fluctuations in the cosmic microwave background radiation that the Fedorate's instruments, bound by your laws of physics, cannot detect. These fluctuations are not random. They are localized pressure points where the decay is accelerating. One such pressure point, a nascent collapse of stable constants, is centered precisely at the edge of the Fedorate's core territories. Kale pointed to a dark, churning area on the holographic map, a region where the color spectrum representing universal constants blurred into incomprehensible noise. This region will not explode or collapse into a black hole. It will simply cease to exist as a coherent physical location, resulting in a localized, absolute termination of matter and energy. Your physics cannot detect it because it operates on principles outside your observable universe. We, having pushed our civilization through the crucible of self-destruction to achieve conceptual navigation, are the only species in this sector that possesses the means to both accurately map the decay and potentially stabilize the localized constants. The true purpose of the Pinnacle was thus revealed. It was not a vessel of conquest, nor a scientific probe, but a conceptual stabilizer, an architectural solution to a cosmic entropy the Fedorate was blind to. The myths were not merely proven true, they were terrifyingly literal. The humans were the engineers of constraint, not limiting others, but constraining the universe itself. We arrived not to impose our will, but to warn you and to recruit your logistical capacity, Lyra concluded, the quiet intensity in her voice reaching a crescendo. The technology itself is not the solution, the collective ethical use of that technology is. If the Fedorate continues to prioritize political dominance and the illusion of scarcity over collective survival, we cannot integrate our efforts effectively, and the silent tide will consume a vast portion of this galactic sector. The obsidian chamber descended into a paralyzing silence, broken only by the shuddering breaths of the Vorlag emissary, Sesk. He rose slowly, drawing the attention of every remaining delegate, his ancient eyes fixed upon the shifting decay map. The warnings, they were incomplete, Sesk rasped, a mix of terror and revelation in his voice. The myth stated that the arrival of the silent crucible would usher in a necessary destruction of the old order, not through war, but through unbearable truth. We assumed the danger was the humans themselves. We were wrong. The humans are not the danger. They are the asterisk response to the danger we refuse to see. We ignored the warnings of the void because we were too busy fighting over planetary resources. The ship, the Pinnacle Asterisk, it proved the myths were real, but it also proved our self-imposed ignorance was fatal. Thuron, utterly humbled, rose from the primary speaker's dais. The cold logic that had guided his entire political life had led him to the precipice of galactic error. He realized that the humans, with their chaotic, volatile history, had achieved genuine maturity because they had faced the internal existential void and survived, while the Fedorate had merely avoided external conflicts by rigid standardization. "The Fedorate will comply," Thuron declared, his voice echoing with new, heavy sincerity. "We will dismantle the outdated economic structures. We will reprioritize all logistical, scientific, and political capacity toward the immediate support of the Terran stabilization effort. Envoy Lyra, Envoy Kale, inform your command. We are now a unified front against the Silent Tide. We require instruction." The subsequent period saw the most radical, immediate, and profound restructuring of galactic civilization in documented history. Kriller, using their vast industrial capacity, began the rapid construction of specialized energy nodes designed by the Terrans, devices that utilized conceptual navigation principles to create localized constant coherence fields, essentially building invisible, ethical dams against the entropic decay. The Cygnus Collective provided the massive computational power required to predict the complex fluctuations of the Silent Tide, working in symbiotic unity with Terran predictive modeling. The Vorlag, now validated in their ancient dread, offered their vast cultural and historical archives, which contained faint, long-forgotten star charts and astronomical observations that provided unforeseen insight into the decay's historical progression. Humanity, represented by the small, silent presence of the Pinnacle Asterisk, became the anchor of the new, unified Fedorate effort. They demanded nothing but rigorous adherence to ethical resource management and absolute transparency. They were not commanders but lead engineers of reality. Months turned into years. The stabilization effort was agonizingly slow, demanding the kind of sustained, focused effort that the Fedorate, accustomed to short-term political gains, found initially difficult. The humans, however, maintained their quiet discipline, their moral compass unswaying. They never displayed impatience, never arrogance, only a profound, calm sense of urgency. During a particularly fraught period of calibration near the burgeoning decay zone, Ambassador Var, now acting as the primary liaison between the Fedorate and the Terran contingent, found himself on board the Pinnacle once more, watching Lyra supervise the synchronization of a newly deployed stabilization node. "Envoy Lyra," Var addressed her, the formality now softened by mutual respect. "I still struggle to comprehend how a species that nearly destroyed itself multiple times could achieve this level of integrated ethical and technological mastery so quickly. The difference between your observed history and your current state is vast, almost incomprehensible." Lyra paused, her gaze distant, fixed on the holographic projection of the collapsing constants. "It is the nature of the crucible, Ambassador. Our ancestors faced philosophical challenges, concepts of self-worth, collective responsibility, the ultimate meaning of existence, that the Fedorate avoided through stable, imposed order. We were forced to answer those questions under duress. When you know empirically that a single mistake, a single act of unchecked ambition, could mean total annihilation, the calculus of power changes fundamentally. We learned that the true measure of technological advance is not what it allows you to do asterisk, but what it grants you the wisdom to refrain from doing." She turned to Var, her expression gentle. "The Pinnacle is powerful, yes, but its true power lies in the fact that every system on board, from the smallest structural filament to the conceptual navigation core, is governed by an inherent ethical constraint matrix. We built the potential for total destruction into our vessel, and then we spent centuries developing the protocols to ensure we could never, under any circumstance, utilize that potential for fish gain. We are the masters of absolute restraint. That is the lesson the myths were trying to teach." The political climate of the Fedorate stabilized entirely around the shared existential threat. Old rivalries melted away. Kriller infrastructure was repurposed for universal good. The Cygnus Collective found a new intellectual frontier in the physics of the Silent Tide. The Vorlag, relieved of their ancient burden of fear, became the moral philosophers of the new era. The stabilization effort reached its most critical juncture near the collapsing sector. The Terran Fedorate coalition had successfully deployed an interlocking grid of coherence fields, but the decay was accelerating faster than predicted, pushing the temporal boundaries to their absolute limit. Lyra and Kale prepared the Pinnacle for the final, dangerous operation. inserting the vessel itself into the most turbulent nexus of the silent tide to initiate a total, localized recalibration of the constants, a maneuver that carried an immense risk of the ship and its crew being erased from reality. As the Asterisk Pinnacle prepared to breach the collapsing zone, Lyra transmitted a final, formal message to the unified command center of the Fedorate, where Thuron, Sesk, and Var waited with agonizing anticipation. Unified Terran contingent preparing final maneuver. Note, the stabilization will be achieved. However, the intensity of the decay has revealed something further, something outside of our localized observation field. The image on the Fedorate screen shifted. Kale appeared next to Lyra, his face grim yet focused. Ambassador Var, Speaker Thuron, the localized collapse of constants near the Fedorate core territory is not merely random entropic decay. It is the result of external interference. Something immense, operating on a scale that dwarfs even our conceptual physics, has subtly utilized this region as a gravitational or energetic anchor point for a vast, abandoned structure. We did not discover the decay. We discovered the aftershock of something colossal retreating from this reality. Lyra reactivated the shared projection, this time overlaying the decay map with a filtered, highly focused sensor reading taken at the nexus of the collapse. The projection revealed not chaos, but symmetry. Faint, recurring geometric patterns of impossibly immense scale, spanning light years, momentarily visible beneath the blurring entropy. These were not natural formations. They were the ghost image of a transcendent architecture. This is what the Pinnacle was truly built to find, Lyra said, her voice weighted with the staggering revelation. Not just the silent tide, but the evidence of a civilization that built structures of such size that they could destabilize the very constants of the universe merely by their residual existence. We believe this megastructure was abandoned eons ago, perhaps by a species that transcended this reality entirely, or perhaps one that failed catastrophically. Kale continued, Asterisk, the localized decay is the result of this structure's gravitational legacy, a silent cosmological footprint. But the Terran sensors detected something else buried within the structure's residual energy signature, a faint, cyclical broadcast signal, not aggressive nor desperate, but informational. It is a message, encoded using universal constants as a language base, a communication intended for any civilization capable of detecting the decay and possessing the technological maturity to stabilize reality. The message was decoded by the Joint Terran Cygnus Computation Core almost instantaneously, thanks to the Terrans' mastery of fundamental physics. It appeared on the screen not as text or voice, but as a complex, emotionally resonant tapestry of pure mathematical truth, translating ultimately into a simple, devastating concept. Lyra concluded, her eyes burning with an almost spiritual fervor. Asterisk, the message confirms our fears, but also validates our unity. It states that the universe is not merely expanding. It is actively being contained by a complex, multidimensional boundary. The structure we detected was part of an ancient, cosmic effort to prevent what lies beyond the boundary from entering. That structure failed. The decay is not merely entropic. It is the slow, deliberate leaking of an existence outside of our known reality, an existence governed by principles antithetical to life, form, and coherence. The terrifying twist solidified. The true threat was not the decay itself, but what the decay was allowing to seep through. The humans, the chaotic, volatile species that had painfully refined its ethical core, had arrived with the Asterisk Pinnacle not merely to save the Fedorate, but to prepare the galaxy for a war against an unimaginable, non-physical terror. Thuron stared at the screen, no longer seeing a political problem or a technological hurdle, but the true, naked face of the cosmic frontier. The arrogance of the Kriller, the fear of the Vorlag, the detachment of the Cygnus Collective, all were meaningless in the face of this incomprehensible truth. They ignored the warning, Thuron whispered, realizing the depth of his civilization's blind self-assurance. We ignored the subtle, ancient warnings of our own history, the whispers of the Vorlag, the statistical anomalies of physics, all because we believed our structure was absolute. Then the ship, the Pinnacle Asterisk, proved the myths were real, but revealed the myths were only half the story. The final reflection was Sesk's, his massive form resting heavily against the console, his gaze fixed on the receding image of the Pinnacle as it entered the collapse nexus, a single, solitary beacon of refined ethical power confronting the ultimate threat. The universe is not benign, Sesk intoned, his voice carrying the final, profound weight of the ancient Vorlag wisdom now fused with Terran certainty. We sought stability in what we knew. Humanity, in its agonizing journey through chaos, sought truth in what was unknown. They taught us that true power is not the capacity to dominate, but the profound responsibility to defend existence itself, even against concepts that defy our very perception of reality. They came not to conquer, but to unite us in defense of the fragile, precious coherence of matter, proving that the most volatile life is often the only kind prepared to face the unmaking of all things. We are no longer the federated sentience. We are the vanguard armed not with fleets, but with the quiet, terrifying logic of humanity. The screen displayed the last confirmed signature of the pinnacle just before it vanished into the swirling chaos of the cosmic constant collapse, its mission to mend the fabric of reality underway. The signal was absolute silence, yet the effect it left upon the chamber was deafening. A solemn, binding understanding that the true age of galactic existence had just begun, championed by the unlikely architects of the silent crucible, humanity. The Fedorate was now transformed, standing ready, united by fear, guided by the ethical fortitude of a species they had once deemed insignificant, preparing for a war against a leak from the void itself, a cosmic threat that only the disciplined, dangerous architects of the pinnacle had been prepared to face. The long silence descended upon the obsidian chamber, not of exhaustion, but of unified, focused resolve, awaiting the inevitable return of the vessel that proved that sometimes the deepest myths are the only true history.